My name is Susan Green. I'm an attorney. I've been so for over 25 years. In my capacity as an attorney, I wear two hats. I represent physicians before medical boards defending their licenses. I also represent patients who have been damaged by medical negligence. The science regarding this test, we have in Maryland at Johns Hopkins Hospital a biorepository that is the gold standard in the country. Basically, Dr. John Alcott took patients with bullseye rashes. Therefore, we know they have a prima facie case of Lyme. And when they enrolled them in the program, they tested their skin samples, their blood, their urine, their spinal column fluids. On admission to that program, over 60% of those people who we know are positive tested false negative. The patients were treated. 8 weeks later, they were retested, and what we found was that in that cohort of patients of 60% who tested negative, over 70% of the women who were retested still tested negative, but 35% of the men now tested positive. And we know that some people are never going to test positive. Why is that? Well, just recently, and you'll see in your package, 3 weeks ago, the Mayo Clinic discovered a new form of the bacteria. In addition to that, 2 new forms of the bacteria were found in Florida. So because of that, there cannot be a test at this time, maybe ever, because there's always constantly emerging new forms of the bacteria. The assay, the test, does not include those forms of bacteria. So you're never going to find out whether the person being tested has antibodies to it. Now, most doctors in mainstream medicine do not know that this test is inaccurate. And I would direct your attention to the opposition filed by MedChi, wherein it says, in their opposition to this language, it says, the notice itself may not be clinically valid. Well, here's what we do know. What we know is that between the Hopkins study, the SLICE study, and you have in your package reference to that study, between their research and their confirmation, and between the CDC, you also have in your package, the CDC only says this test is to be used to count the number of cases only. This is not a diagnostic tool. Lyme disease should be diagnosed clinically, not through this test. We know the test is bad. The patient needs to know, and the patient needs to know because the clock is ticking. The sooner that you discover you have Lyme, if it's treated early on, you have a shot of making a recovery. Once it's gone untreated, you have no shot of recovering. And as a result of that, you can wind up chronically ill. ILADS, the International Lyme and Associated Disease Society, you should have this in your package as well, is supporting this disclosure agreement because they recognize the inadequacy of the testing. ILADS is on the front line of treating patients with Lyme disease, and they know that this test is inaccurate. I also would like to point out that the doctors say, we don't want you interfering with, with our practices. Well, you know what? Every profession's regulated. We regulate all the time, medical boards, HIPAA, and the breast density law. So this is not new. This is not new legislation. Additionally, what's really scary is the fact that the doctors don't know. So what happens is, sometimes some lab tests already have a disclaimer on them to say this test is not reliable, and if you test negative and you still have symptoms, you should return to your doctor. Unfortunately, the ones that do put that on there, the language is so small it can't even be read. The doctors see on the test, Lyme disease, negative. They're busy, the doctors. They go on to the next patient. They never even see that language, and the patients never receive it. I am a personal victim of this particular poor testing. I tested 4 times negative, and I had a seizure in the middle of a trial, lost my ability to speak. My hands curled up like this, and I couldn't use them. My memory was wiped out, and I wound up with seizures and blackouts. It took 20 months of IV antibiotics to save my life because it had hit my heart, my brain, and my lungs. And unfortunately, I passed it to my son in utero, so he too has the disease as a result of 4 negative tests. I thank you for your consideration, and I urge you to pass this bill. We've made a lot of progress in Maryland. 8 years ago, when we started walking the halls, the Lyme community had a terrible reputation. Evidently, there had been other Lyme advocates that preceded us who had approached the representatives in a very angry and unprofessional way. So when we started, the minute they heard the word Lyme, the door would pretty much get shut quickly. It has taken us 8 years of building relations with the senators and the delegates, providing literature and explaining to them and educating and spreading awareness. And over the years, we've been helpful in, we've consulted on bills, we've tried to help them any way we can, and I now feel that we have a really good working relationship with our representatives, and they get it. And I always say, you know, this war, we're winning the war one bite at a time, and every day someone else is getting bitten. We were just down in Virginia, and a senator stood up on the floor, and he talked about how he almost died on the Senate floor, and he talked about how a year and a half later he was still on antibiotics. Every time you have somebody who has a family member or loved one bitten, and they go through the experience, I always say you don't get it till you get it, but people are learning.
Now, there's a lot of really good research, a lot of science out there right now to support everything that you're saying. Do you think it's just that's what's taking so long, that the research is finally catching up with what the patients have been saying for years?
Well, I think that there's still a lot of research left to be done, especially peer-reviewed literature. One of the problems that we face, and I represent a lot of the physicians who are on the cutting edge of the Lyme battle, and so often medical boards will limit their view to the traditional IDSA guidelines, which, by the way, are down now. Only the ILADS guidelines are up. So what winds up happening is they wind up persecuting the doctors who are on the front lines. And therefore, it's really hard for them to be able to get ahead, do the research, write peer-reviewed articles, because they're constantly under scrutiny and attack from medical boards. It's changing. It's changing slowly. And we're very encouraged by a lot of the new peer-reviewed literature coming out of Hopkins and some other hospitals and institutions.
Now, do you feel like this is just the first step in terms of legislation? I mean, there's a long way to go. Are you already moving in that direction, or is the focus strictly on just getting that early detection, early prevention?
We just finished up 2 bills in Virginia. We went back. One of the things that's really interesting is, in order to protect the physicians, you know, there's 2 schools of thought. There's the IDSA guidelines, which were 28 days worth of antibiotics, you're cured. IDSA has traditionally felt that the disease is hard to catch and easy to cure. 28 days, it's over. They don't believe in chronic Lyme, or did not previously believe in chronic Lyme. On the other hand, ILADS doctors, who are on the front line treating the patients all the time, they've recognized that there are certain strains, there's certain co-infections, there's certain immunocompromise in patients that is making it very difficult for patients to get well in the traditional 28-day protocol. And they've been treating with longer-term antibiotics. So we went back to Virginia, Monty and I, NatCap Lyme, and what we did was we asked for the protection of the legislature for physicians who choose to prescribe for patients pursuant to either any protocol listed in the National Guideline Clearinghouse Registry. So that included, at the time that we filed it, the IDSA guidelines and the ILADS guidelines. As luck would have it, once we started down that road, the IDSA guidelines had to be removed because they were stale, they were old, they weren't up to the Institute of Medicine standards, and so they removed their guidelines. Now the only guidelines that are really on the registry are the ILADS guidelines, which call for longer-term treatment.
Now, with IDSA saying that they're going to update those guidelines, do you have any optimism that they're going to be doing it in a positive way for Lyme sufferers?
I always say, prepare for the worst and pray for the best. You know, it's my sincerest hope that they will take a more enlightened approach. I have not traditionally seen any movement in that direction. So sadly, I'm not waiting for it, but gosh, I hope they'll pleasantly surprise me.
So in terms of the opposition that was presented today, what do you have to say in response to it?
Well, first of all, the gentleman who testified from the trial lawyers loved that guy in the sense that We don't believe there should be any immunity, and the only immunity that was ever offered was for the actual handing of the piece of paper, okay? We don't even think that's necessary. I believe, as I stated in there, that this is a bill that protects doctors. You know, just like the informed consent you get before surgery, this bill will protect doctors if patients try to come back against them and say, you never told me the test could be negative. And I can tell you, I get calls, my phone rings off the wall from Lyme patients who've been misdiagnosed. So while they don't understand it, I'm helping them. Okay, but they unfortunately don't want to be told how to practice medicine. I don't really see this as practicing medicine. I see this as giving an informed consent that the patient has a right to. But he went on to say that he thinks that they should add to the bill, not only should you give notice to the patient, but you should treat them prophylactically while you're waiting for the results. Love that guy.
That's a nice surprise. Yes,
well, it's what I would recommend. I'm not a doctor, but I mean, if my son comes home, as he did on Mother's Day, with a tick in a bag, because he knows, I always tell him, save the tick, honey. We have to get it tested. If my son comes home with a tick in a bag, first thing I'm going to do is put him on antibiotics till I find out what that tick has. Because if I can intervene early, then the chances are my son's not going to get sick again. When I got sick, I got Lyme, Bartonella, ehrlichiosis, and Babesia. Babesia is the first cousin to malaria, and I will be on anti-malarials probably the rest of my life.